Thank you for joining us today for the Desert Southwest Soil Health Webinar. My name is Robert Masson, and I'm an agricultural extension agent from Yuma, Arizona. It's my job to extend the educational resources of the University of Arizona out into the community, taking the lessons from the classroom out into the field. We've brought together some of the best minds in soil health from academia, industry, and government organizations to help teach us today about the subject. The soil health webinar today will be broken into 3 different topics. Module 1, defining soil health, where we will add some clarity to what it means to have a healthy soil. Module 2, practices to improve soil health, where we will discuss methods we can use to increase the health of our soils. And Module 3, soil pest control, where we will discuss ways to protect the health of our crops growing in the field. Our first speaker is Geoff Koch, a PhD student at the University of California at Davis. His area of research focuses on nutrient cycling, greenhouse gas fluxes, and soil carbon dynamics as they are related to agricultural management in the California agro-ecosystem. Today, he will speak to us about the meaning of soil health in our arid desert regions.
My name is Geoff Koch. I'm a PhD student at UC Davis in the Department of Land, Air, and Water Resources. And I'm studying soils and biogeochemistry. So it's my second year and I'm in the Horwath lab, and it's been great to be here at Davis, but I'm going to get into my presentation. All right. So, sorry. So what do we think of when we think of the Southwest? We have desert ecosystems largely. And not only desert ecosystems, but we have a Mediterranean climate where we don't get a lot of rainfall. And we don't naturally think of these places where we can produce a lot of vegetables. However, we do. We add water and tillage and agrochemicals, pesticides, farmer knowledge, and we produce huge amounts of vegetables and forage and food, fiber for the world in these areas. So we do it by altering these ecosystems and by putting in a lot of inputs. So why should we start to think about why should we be paying attention to soil health? What's important here? How is soil health defined? What makes the Southwest so much different than other places? Soil health is important everywhere, but what makes the Southwest US or the Western US different? What should our goals be when we start to manage for soil health? And what are some resources? So this is kind of an overview of what I'm going to talk to you about today. So we, 100 years ago, I guess it was, approximately, the NRCS, it was previously called the Soil Conservation Service, was created. And they were created because of degradation, because of soil degradation across the country. And so the Dust Bowl, everyone's familiar with the Dust Bowl, but since then, since the Dust Bowl ended, it isn't necessarily in the public image that we see degradation around us all the time. We see a lot of productivity. And I think that that's largely because a lot of our reduction in productivity or the problems in agriculture have been covered up by the fact that we can just add inputs. We have a lot of technology, we have water infrastructure, we have tillage equipment, and we can mask our soil health problems by just adding more inputs. So this is a picture that I took last fall at the end of the year when tillage operations were going on here in California. And this is just, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about tillage. I'll leave that to Geoff Mitchell later on. But I just wanted to show this picture so there's no confusion that we still have problems with erosion in the West. We may not have a lot of rainfall, a lot of water erosion. That still is a problem, but it's not as widespread, but we do have wind erosion. You know, that dust you see there is not only mineral material, but there's organic matter there. And we're already working with such small amounts of organic matter in the West that losing it in this quantity every year or twice a year when we do tillage is not a good thing. So yeah, again, agriculture is more productive than it's ever been, right? So what's the problem? You know, why should we care? But again, we're relying on inputs that are expensive, and some of them can be destructive. Some of the pesticides we use can be pretty harsh, and we have to use them a lot. You know, fertilizers and tillage and all these inputs, they cost something. So again, we don't have a problem with like we had with the Dust Bowl. So you know, who cares? But we do see reduced air quality, wind and water erosion, nitrogen leaching, and unstable yields due to drought disease pressure. So, and you know, also we don't, maybe you don't have a problem with salinity in your soils. However, when salinity does become a problem, it's usually slow and cumulative, and it can take years and a lot of water to address it later on. It's an insidious problem, so we want to think about it before it becomes a problem. So here's some statistics that I thought were rather sobering. An estimated $8 billion in economic losses worldwide are due to soil erosion, and this is each year. And this is a very recent study, so it's recent data. That's quite a large number. And another thing is, if we have these soils that were, you know, that can be degraded in a year or two with mismanagement, they can take hundreds or thousands of years to form and to regenerate. So if we can't just get them back in a year or two with some improved management. We have to protect them and conserve them, or it's gonna, you know, we're gonna wish we hadn't. And this is another thing is we really want to try to maintain organic matter in our soils because they contribute a large amount to the fertility and the productivity in those soils, especially in sandier, coarser textured soils. Organic matter is really important for maintaining fertility and for keeping your yields stable over time. So it's just like a backstop. I thought this was a really cool paper from 1917, actually, but it's talking about climate change and agricultural exhaustion as elements in the fall of Rome. Rome was a republic that lasted for a long time. However, it did fall. And why did it fall? A lot of people think that it was because they mismanaged their agricultural system. Okay, so one more point to drive it home here. We have only 11% of the land on the Earth's surface is responsible for feeding 6 billion people. Over 7 billion people actually now. So I see it as our job, you know, as agricultural researchers and, you know, farmers and extension people to manage that land and to keep it productive for future generations. But this is not a small or easy task, and I definitely recognize that. Okay, so how do we define soil health? This is a big question, and it varies a lot. There's a lot of different definitions across, you know, the country, across the world, and I think that they point to different goals or different audiences, but we'll try to tackle that a little bit here. And it's easy to get lost. I totally recognize that. There's a lot of jargon, a lot of science mumbo jumbo, but we'll try to keep it pretty straightforward and accessible here so we can all try to understand what the point is when we're talking about soil health. And again, there's a lot of different types of analysis. What should I choose? What is the defining factor in soil health? What's important? So there's I'm going to go through a few organizations here. One of them that it's hard to miss when you talk about soil health is the Soil Health Institute. The Soil Health Institute is it's a nationwide organization that its main focus is to talk about soil health. And so this is actually from their strategy page. They don't have a definition of soil health page, but the bottom of the quote here, it says, in short, soil health is the foundation for regenerative and sustainable agriculture. But if you look above in the quote, the rest of the things that they're talking about all have to do with ecosystem services, enhancing yield stability, increased biodiversity, enhanced pollinator or wildlife habitat, reduce nutrient losses, all those things, those are all ecosystem services. They have a really awesome project going on right now called the North America Project to evaluate soil health measurements in all of North America and to assess which of the indicators, which of the scientific tests we should use to consider soil health. There's some really cool projects. I encourage you to go check out their page if you get a chance. So CDFA, the California Department of Food and Agriculture, is another program. They have this soil health initiative, and again, a lot of what they talk about in the soil health initiative has to do with ecosystem services, preventing erosion, sequestering carbon, improving water quality. Some of these also have to do with more like soil quality, improving plant and crop yields, and water retention and infiltration. Some of those are more on the soil quality side, but still, we're talking about ecosystem services. So, and again, NRCS, this is originally created as the Soil Conservation Service, after the Dust Bowl, after it became clear that we needed to manage our soils better. So soil health, also referred to as soil quality, is defined as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And again, these bullet points that they have, these are all about ecosystem services, cycling nutrients, regulating water, sustaining plant and animal life, physical stability and support, buffering potential pollutants. This idea that soils are a filter that filter water and capture pollutants and do all these great things. These are all ecosystem services that need to be maintained. So finally, we have the Cornell Comprehensive Assessment of Soil Health. This is a really great document. It's kind of long, but if you really want to get into the in depth about soil health, it's a great thing to look at. And they take this this idea that there's two aspects. There's soil quality, there's dynamic and inherent soil quality. So inherent soil quality are things like soil type, texture, drainage class, climate, these things that we can't really change. But then there's these dynamic qualities, and these respond to management. So dynamic soil quality, they're saying, is equivalent to soil health because these things are going to respond when you manage the soil a certain way. So the picture on the right here I thought was pretty great, and it has a left and a right as well. So the left of the right says this is a soil that was managed for improved soil health, tillage radish growing in long-term pasture hay with occasional crops. And this is, on the right of that, is the same soil as far as this inherent quality. It's the same soil, but it clearly doesn't look the same. Intensive management leading to soil degradation. So this is, if we are not considering reinvesting in soils, putting something back, then we get something on the, like we have on the right there. Our structure decreases over time, soil organic matter disappears, fertility reduces, and pest and disease pressure. There's been a lot of research that says pest and disease pressure actually really increases when soils don't have that natural balance going on. So again, what is the main theme in between all these existing soil health measurements or metrics? It all has to do with ecosystem services. We're all really benefiting every day as a farmer or as just people walking across the earth from the ecosystem services that soils provide. And we should think about them as an inheritance from a wealthy relative, because we have a wealth of this resource that we take advantage of. But we have to really think about whether we're investing in it or squandering it. So soil health is all about reinvesting. If we want to improve soil health, we have to think about what our soil on this piece of land is different than that piece of land, what this piece of land that we're working with needs, and then do that. Okay, so in the Southwest, what makes it different? So the biggest difference is water. The water balance in the West is much different. This is a chart on the left of average precipitation minus average potential evapotranspiration. So this is a water deficit. How much irrigation water do we have to apply to meet the deficit that exists because of the temperature and the humidity that exists in the climate? So as you can see in the whole West, unless we're up in the Sierras or on the coast in some places, but even on the coast in a lot of places, we still have a deficit. There's a huge water deficit, and this means that there's not adequate. Sorry, my light's going off. Hopefully, you guys can still see me. There's not enough water there's not enough water to leach soils like we have in the Midwest and the East Coast. So this causes problems. This causes difference in pH, differences when we think about salinity, and it also makes building organic matter very difficult. So climate, again, warmer average temperatures and lower precipitation make biological decomposition fast, but production of biomass relatively slow by comparison. So, we don't have as much net primary productivity, not as many plants growing and things depositing organic material on the soil surface. So there's less organic material there naturally. And again, precipitation is less than evapotranspiration. So we don't have leaching of those salts, those soluble salts, so they collect in the soil, in the root zone. And then this also leads to higher pH. So pH is one of the most important soil indicator when it comes to nutrient availability for plants, I would argue. And the climate that we have in the West results in less leaching. So we have buildup of carbonates, alkaline salts in the soil, which raises pH. Also, rainfall is acidic. A lot of people don't realize that, but rainfall is acidic. And so less rainfall means less sources of acidity, and you're also not leaching out those alkaline materials from the soil. And then biological respiration, CO2, carbonic acid. So less respiration means slower weathering and also smaller sources of acidity. So all these things are resulting in a higher pH environment in the West. So this is an example, kind of an extreme example of a soil from California. And this is a natural, this is not a managed soil. This is from the Coast Range. And you can see the Coast Range, so right above you know, the Mendota area or the Five Points area. So this is material that's being moved and deposited down in the valley over the last couple thousand years. So you see the calcium carbonate equivalent is high. Organic matter at the highest point is only 0.8%. It's very low. And pH is, again, very high because of these soluble alkaline materials. So salinity, salinity is all about water movement, if you know, the way I think about it. So this is a picture from the Eastern Sierras, not too far from Mono Lake, but this is a salt marsh. And what's happening here is you have a dry environment and you have lots of these soluble salts in the parent material, in the rock, in the soil. And the spring is pushing water up. And then you have evaporation because it's hot. And so these soluble salts collect on the surface. So since we have such little rainfall in the West compared to evapotranspiration or you know, just evaporation, this is what happens with salt, because we have just as much or just as many or more salts as any other rock around, but we don't have the rainfall that will leach it away down past the root zone. So it collects on the soil surface. So that's why we have to be really concerned and really cognizant of not only our irrigation water, but what level and what type of salts are in our soils. And we need to remediate them or deal with them accordingly, because they'll build up, and before you know it, we'll have a real problem. So again, soil organic matter is a huge issue in the Southwest. It's tough to build it and to keep it around. Growing cover crops is one way to build organic matter, but they require water, and water's in short supply. A lot of the research looks like it's worth it. It should invest in it anyways. And again, organic amendments, another way to build organic matter. They're not always available at a reasonable cost. Either they're not available or they're the shipping cost is excessive. And then again, last thing is food safety when it comes to organic amendments is really, it's a real concern, but there are solutions to this. And where there aren't solutions right now, they need to be found, because manures, compost, cover crops, these are our best investments when it comes to building organic matter in soils. Okay, so some goals. The way I see it, again, for soil health, reduce losses, degradation to soil. We should at least start by not harming them. Manage fertility so systems are less leaky. If we can add less nitrogen to prevent leaching, that would be amazing. And then maximize ecosystem services. This is just how the functions that exist naturally in soils. And if we can support them or protect them or increase them, that's just going to make those soils function better. And then again, these will all result in improved stability and yields in the face of stress, disturbance, and that includes drought, climate change, you name it. Any kind of stress or disturbance, a stronger, more balanced soil, healthier soil will be able to deal with that disturbance better. All right, so really quick here at the end, cooperative extension, land grant universities, these systems were created to support the public, to support agriculture. So take advantage of them. They're out there. That's why we're here today, is because of extension. So please take advantage. It's a really great resource. The Soil Health Institute, they're doing some really awesome work. Even if you just spend some time looking through their site, it's really great. So I encourage you to do that. And then if you are in agriculture, look to farmer leaders. These farmer leaders really do some amazing things, and they can show you how it's done. There's an example of Scott Park here in Northern California. He's right in our area here, and he's doing it right, and it's really cool to see farmer leaders And so I know that some farmers and some agriculturalists, you know, they aren't as interested in hearing from people like me, from researchers. However, they're more likely to listen to farmer leaders, and that's understandable. And so, you know, do that, but take advantage one way or the other, and look to these people that are leaders that you can listen to. All right, that's all I have. Thanks so much for your time. I encourage you to reach out to me either in the chat right now if you have questions, or send me an email at any time. I'm also on LinkedIn and Twitter and all that kind of stuff. So feel free to reach out, and hope you have a great rest of your seminar today. Cheers.
Our next speaker, Dr. Joey Blankinship, is an assistant professor in soil science at the University of Arizona, who is involved with many grant-funded research projects involving soil health. Today, he's going to speak to us about soil organic carbon.
Thank you for being here. I'm not stuck in a hole right now, but wouldn't it be wonderful if all of our soils in the Southwest looked like this and had that nice brown right up here that we're trying to accumulate. I'd really like to get two main points across to you all today. The first point is to realize the importance of both the concentration and composition of soil organic matter for assessing and enhancing soil health. I was put in the module on assessing and defining soil health, so I'll leave it to my great colleagues that'll talk later about enhancing. But you'll see I'll be kind of going with that during this talk about how we can relate assessment and soil organic matter science to assessing and enhancing soil health. The second point is that soil health needs to be diagnosed differently in drier climates, and Geoff nicely brought up some of these issues. Soil health assessments and enhancements developed in wetter climates may not apply in the desert. So we really need to find the best options for building soil organic matter in arid climates. And in contrast to what Geoff said, I think we don't know what the best options are for building soil organic matter in arid climates yet. A lot of what we've learned is from wetter climates, so I think there's real opportunities to learn about, and I'll tell you about some of those mechanisms. So one definition that I believe Geoff also mentioned that the NRCS uses is the continued capacity of a soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. So there's really this importance of biology and an emphasis on functioning. And in terms of soil organic matter, we know that soil organic matter has multiple benefits for soil health and functioning. There's a long literature ranging from before the 90s, but here's an example of a study from 1994 on the left showing as organic matter increases on the x-axis, you get greater field capacity, which is this higher line, and also the permanent wilting point increases. A more recent study manipulating organic matter content in a greenhouse found this nice, positive effect. Organic matter acts as a sponge to hold on to water, but also it can capture more water, but also potentially hold on to water for longer. Organic matter also acts as a glue in soil. It creates water-stable soil aggregates, which are basically a packaging of soil that helps, I'll talk later, it helps preserve organic matter, but it also helps resist wind and water erosion, which is a really big issue. And on this cartoon on the right side, the particulate organic matter are these red pieces, but you can imagine these almost as rebar in a soil aggregate. It helps hold everything together. There's also organic matter associations with minerals, which is kind of shown here with the gray and the yellow. But the key here is that soil organic matter increases soil stability. Soil organic matter also acts as a slow release fertilizer. Here's just some general data, but ideally what would happen instead of with inorganic fertilizers where there's an initial pulse within the first week or so that then goes down immediately, there's more and more evidence showing that organic matter can act as a slow release fertilizer and kind of slowly release inorganic nitrogen and phosphorus, but potentially other micronutrients over time. soil organic matter, I feel like I'm on a sales pitch for soil organic matter. It can do a lot of things, but I'll tell you about one main limitation. It can also reduce pH over time, although that can be difficult sometimes when there's a big buffering capacity. But overall, it tends to decrease soil pH over time and make soils more resistant to pH. Now, one thing that soil organic matter does not necessarily directly benefit, because once you have salts in soil, sometimes it's difficult to get them out without, as Geoff mentioned, leaching them out of the system with precipitation. So soil organic matter doesn't directly benefit soil salinity, but it may indirectly benefit soil salinity by increasing infiltration and percolation of water in soil. Soil organic matter, relating this to the microbiome and microbial activities in soils, there's evidence showing that when you have more organic matter, you have more microbial biomass, which is shown here on the left. And there's also, I just showed one example, but there's plenty of evidence showing that when you add amendments, these are various manures and compost here versus the control treatment, you also can increase the diversity, the species richness of the system. So we know that the microbiome can be very important for resisting pathogens, potentially, and in general, that's a goal. We want to overall probably increase microbial biodiversity so that we have more like different functions represented in the microbiome. And finally, I think the gold standard really for soil health, at least in croplands, is connecting this to crop yield. And there's some promising evidence from the greenhouse. Yeah, you notice I've showed this study quite a few times from 2020 because they had these nice irrigation and nitrogen manipulations, but the main thing is that they varied organic matter and found that at least when you have little organic matter, which is, for those of you who don't know, oftentimes in the desert Southwest, we're beginning at 1% or below organic matter. So in this paper, they cautioned that, organic matter doesn't always have a big effect, but that's really only above 5%. We have nothing to worry about in desert soils. More organic matter probably benefits all these soil health functions and eventually can potentially increase crop yield. So soil organic matter is an integrative, holistic indicator of soil and plant health. It affects all of these different physical, chemical, and biological soil properties, and also potentially relates to crop health and productivity. Some of the key research gaps that are really driving a lot of the research and development are, first, that there's a lack of data quantifying these relationships in desert croplands. A lot of these things, these patterns here and these connections between soil organic matter and functions seem obvious, but a lot of them have not been actually quantified, and especially in arid ecosystems. Which form of soil organic matter provides the greatest benefits? And this is a big black box as well. And understanding going beyond really bulk measurements where you oftentimes as farmers just get total carbon, but really there's specific types of soil organic matter that might matter more than others. And finally, how to build long-lasting, slow-cycling soil organic matter in a hot desert climate. I'll just kind of finish with that, and again, leave that a lot to my colleagues that are speaking later. So I've been talking about soil organic matter a lot already. What exactly is soil organic matter? And really, at the most basic level, it is all the solid carbon, so meaning that not carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide, but all the solid state carbon in soil that's not inorganic carbonate. So the definition of organic matter, if you didn't take organic chemistry, is having carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So carbonates, which Geoff again already mentioned, and oftentimes form these really dense, hard caliche layers, that is not organic matter, but almost everything else is. Things like carbohydrates, cellulose and hemicellulose, and tannins from plant material, lignin from woody material, lipids, amino sugars, proteins, chitin, which is oftentimes in exoskeletons of various macro and microinvertebrates in soils, humic acids. And I put a question mark, and I'll come back to this, but there's more and more evidence from soil science that humic acids are actually an artifact of the laboratory procedure. They have not actually been observed in situ. You can't necessarily take a soil, put it under a scanning electron microscope and see humic acids. It's more of an extraction, chemical extraction from soil. So I'm not gonna, there's a big debate. This is actually a very fun debate going on in soil science. But we do know, okay, even if humic acids don't technically exist in soil, we do know that there's these condensed aromatic hydrocarbons that are difficult to break down. And I'll come back to that later. There's also anything that gets basically when cells die, that's released into the cell environment, things like DNA and RNA, enzymes that are released into the soil, plant root exudates, detritus, so dead animals, dead plants, leaves, stems, and roots, which you're probably most familiar with in terms of maybe what, in terms of adding compost or manure. I didn't actually put that on here, but also animal excretions. Charcoal, which we'll have some great experts later talking about biochar, but just generally any sort of pyrogenic or fire-produced carbon. And then finally, where a lot of the interesting science, I think especially is going, is organic matter is also microbial residues. They're dead cells, which are also known as necromass, and these substances, these sticky substances that they release into the environment. I probably forgot some, but the main point here is there's a lot of sources of soil organic matter that just kind of hang out in soil. But in the desert Southwest, we know it can be very difficult to accumulate organic carbon over time. You know that it's a water desert or a precipitation desert, but it's also a desert for soil organic matter. We have some of the lowest concentrations in North America, in the desert Southwest. And why is it such a challenge to build soil organic matter in deserts? Well, it's hot, so when there is water, so obviously water is limiting, but when there is water, especially in croplands where it's added consistently, there's very fast decomposition of soil organic matter by microorganisms. Temperature is one of the biggest limiting factors on decomposition. Hence, that's why you see all of this carbon up at northern latitudes, at least for now. There's abundant sunlight in the desert. UV sunlight goes through a process called photodegradation of soil organic matter. You've probably seen it, anything you leave outside in the sun that kind of breaks down over time. So it's just a physical process of soil organic matter breaking down near the surface. Sandy soil texture. Most of our major agricultural regions in the desert Southwest are in lower areas, alluvial areas that have a sandy soil texture. This is not always the case, but overall croplands and desert areas tend to have a sandy soil texture. So there's less surface area for soil organic matter to stick to. And I'll come back to that, but just think that clay adds more surface area for organic matter to stick to than sand does. And then finally, as we all know, for anybody that's added organic matter in the field, oftentimes ants, termites, other macroinvertebrates immediately redistribute the soil organic matter. In the case of a big field, of course, you can add enough so that doesn't make a big difference. But this is oftentimes a case where we add organic matter in one place and it's actually redistributed due to biological activity. So for the middle part of my talk here, I really want to address this question: which forms of soil organic matter matter most for soil health? Great question. While soil scientists are working on this, we need to go beyond bulk measurements of soil carbon, which I mentioned earlier, not just looking at the total concentration of carbon, but specific types of organic matter. And I'll try to explain why that is so important. In the meantime, until we know, okay, say this type of lipid really helps with nutrient availability or lignin, or to be able to assign functions to different organic compounds. One compelling way to assign soil organic matter importance is based on how long it persists in the environment. So important soil organic matter should cycle slowly and persist for decades to centuries or even longer. And if you didn't know, soil carbon can be very old. So there has to be natural mechanisms that achieve slow cycling soil organic matter in desert ecosystems. Perfect timing, a paper just came out where they looked globally at using radiocarbon data and actually aged the soil, where there was available data both near the surface and 0 to 30 centimeters, and then also 30 to 100 centimeters. In the surface soil, I'm just including the types of ecosystems or croplands that are in arid climates. The average age of carbon, and the caveat here is this also includes carbonate, so inorganic carbon as well, but this also does include organic carbon. The average age of carbon is anywhere between 500 to 1200 years in the top 30 centimeters. In the subsurface soils, the average age range from 2800 years up to 5300 years. So these are, it is possible to get really old carbon, but I think what the convention right now is that it's basically impossible to accumulate organic carbon over time in arid ecosystems without maybe major interventions. And I think that's really based on when you add compost at the beginning of the growing season, you can increase organic matter, but then it rapidly decreases. But what's going on among soil carbon scientists is that the whole paradigm is shifting and causing these cracks in the paradigm. A paradigm, if you're not aware, really consists of the conceptual understanding or the theory, which is at the top here, the measurements and the models. And I'm really, there's changes happening at all of these nodes of this triangle that are really changing our understanding of soil carbon. And I had led a paper with many other experts in this field, and we tried to really rack our brains and try to understand what's going on between the existing soil organic matter paradigm and the emerging paradigm that's coming out of recent discoveries. And while there's lots of great things happening with measurements and models, for the purposes of time, I really just want to focus on the changes that are happening with theories of soil carbon. And the historical or kind of the classic view of soil carbon persistence in the environment. So how do we build long-lasting soil organic matter is really that it's based on chemical recalcitrance, the chemistry of whatever that organic matter is. Certain chemicals are tougher to break down than others. That is true, but most of this historical view is only based on that. Over time, simple molecules become more complex through physical, chemical, and biological processes, eventually forming humic substances. But as I mentioned, there's some evidence showing that humic substances don't actually exist in soil. So there might be other ways that carbon is stabilized. And where a lot of the science is going now is that there's ecosystem control, so things like climate, the parent material of the soil, the organisms that are there, but also things like at a micro scale, the accessibility of soil organic matter. So a microorganism can be really like right next door to a piece of organic matter. But if there's a clay mineral in the way, it's basically right there, but you can't reach it. So the microbes don't always have access to soil organic matter, which might explain why certain organic matter can persist over time. In terms of saturation, there's more and more evidence showing that different soils have a different capacity to store carbon. You can think of it as like a glass, and that the different soils have different size glasses, and maybe certain ones are half full and some of them are mostly full. Microbial traits, and I'll give you a specific example of this later, is really also where a lot of the interesting science is going. There's microbes that might produce residues that are long lasting, that can actually last decades to centuries or longer. One of the another classic paper nicely showing this shift from historical to emerging views of soil carbon cycling is showing this more historical view that everything was based on condensation reactions. You start with simple compounds and they kind of condense and become more complex over time. Versus these other, and I don't have time to talk about all of these, but the emerging understanding is showing things like fire residues, like biochar and charcoal, are really important for stable carbon. Physical disconnection, which is what I described earlier, where there's inaccessibility of substrates. Absorption, desorption processes, which basically just means organic matter sticking to minerals, but then unsticking. And then freezing and thawing is really important at high elevations and high latitudes, but I don't think we can depend on that mechanism in the Sonoran Desert, for example. Freezing is a great mechanism of storing carbon in other ecosystems, but we can't depend on it in arid systems, in hot climates. Microbial products are another really important emerging understanding, which I mentioned. So according to the new paradigm and recent discoveries, which mechanisms likely create long-lasting soil organic matter in desert soils? And these really range from physical to chemical to biological. And a point I really want to highlight is that in the desert, we don't have the luxury of time usually. Maybe if you're in Canada and you get, or high elevation where you have a long, cold, like wet season, where there's kind of time for anaerobic conditions and cold conditions for these condensation reactions to happen. I don't think we usually have that time, that luxury in the desert. As soon as water is available, or a lot of that organic matter is decomposed. So we need to look at other mechanisms. And 5 of those I want to just quickly go through that I think hold the most promise are first looking at aggregation. I already showed this slide, so I'll go through it really quickly. But just to really emphasize that aggregates, so clay particles being basically glued together through various processes for these larger packages of soil that don't fall apart in water and therefore preserve that organic matter over time. Organic matter can be stuck on the clay surfaces. I'm showing this for all the chemists out there, but this is really a theory, a really cool theory, I think, that is gaining traction over time. And really, to simplify this diagram, on the left side is a clay surface, and there's various charges, that clay can have. But the main point here is that there's different layers of organic matter that directly sticks to clay, but then other organic matter that sticks to that organic matter here. So hence, this is called the onion theory of soil organic matter, where there's maybe different layers that form over time. But I think what's really coming out of the science is that the most stable organic matter is the organic matter that's most closely associated or adsorbed to the clay surface. Another mechanism that that scientists and farmers and that really don't think about in wetter climates, which is really important in drier climates, like Geoff mentioned, is the importance of calcium and/or carbonate. And there's evidence, including this paper that I was a co-author on with my colleague Craig Rasmussen, who's also at the University of Arizona. And we broke it down, all the soils in the database, and this was a global database, and found all the iridosols, which is really the soil order that's based on climate, the climate being arid. And the properties that really jumped out, so the red indicates that there is a statistically significant positive correlation between soil organic matter content and this property. And so clay jumps out here at the top, and that goes along with what I showed previously, the idea that these organic mineral interactions are really important. But also calcium jumped out, which is really interesting, in that calcium, through various mechanisms, can help bind soil together and might help preserve organic matter along with concretions that are formed by calcium carbonate. Finally, even though, or not finally, but the 4th out of the 5 is really not going beyond the importance of chemical structure, but realizing that there are certain chemicals that are going to be more stable in desert soils. Lignin is going to be more stable. It's not going to last forever, but it is going to last a lot longer than cellulose. But also things like charcoal or biochar, which you'll hear more about later. And here's just an example of a chemical structure of this pyrogenic or fire-produced soil organic matter, having all of these aromatic rings that are difficult for microbes to break down. And my colleague Malak Tiafeli at the University of Arizona has some really cool preliminary data, and this is really connecting it to nutrient cycling, but really relating different classes of organic compounds to nitrogen availability in both a bad soil where the lettuce was not doing well in Yuma and a good soil where the lettuce was thriving. And it was interesting that both for nitrogen and phosphorus, the highest concentrations of were found mainly in these like lignin and lipids. Lignin is this kind of purple color here, showing that we need to depend on these different types of maybe more chemically complex or just different compositions of organic matter affects nutrient availability, but also carbon storage. And then finally, there's some great new studies showing out in the past 5 years or so that stable organic matter is produced by microorganisms such as bacteria and fungi in the soil. And there's these papers showing the direct evidence for organic matter formation. And really what's going on here, and just to emphasize, is that the historical paradigm is that organic matter kind of through physical and chemical processes becomes humus, which then becomes long-lasting soil organic matter. The emerging paradigm is really showing that that stable organic matter is the result of microbial processing. Microbes basically have to eat that organic matter, and then it's either exuded kind of intentionally or unintentionally through their dead bodies, get stuck in crevices in soil and in micropores and become long-lasting soil organic matter. A great example of this, there's newer images, but I still love this one from 1993, showing individual kaolinite clay particles and these microbial produced strands, these really sticky strands of polysaccharides. And this is just one example of a type of microbial product that really has the potential to become organic matter, long-lasting organic matter. So in conclusion, really, how can we work with the new paradigm to improve soil organic matter management in drier climates? There's a clear need, and this is just one example that probably many of you have seen, a recent survey, but this was mainly, I think, in the Midwest, maybe in the Northwest as well. But you can imagine in the Southwest, we've also found similar results from surveys. Which benefits of soil health are most important to you? And this is across farmers, researchers, across all industry stakeholders. Building soil organic matter jumps out at the very top. A lot of these I've already mentioned and are related. Soil aggregate stability is related to organic matter. So I really look at this as, okay, if we can build organic matter, a lot of these other benefits come along with that. So some just quick examples of, and I didn't even want to give a whole slide to these because I think, just to kind of give some case studies of amending soil with biochar is one example that you'll hear more about later. You add more soil charcoal, and we know charcoal is a stable form of soil organic matter. So right now, biochar is a great way of getting stable organic matter in soil, but it's still relatively expensive. Reduce tillage. If you minimize or go to no tillage, there's evidence showing that you can preserve or even form more soil aggregates. And I mentioned earlier that aggregates contain slow cycling soil organic matter. So that's something that my lab is currently investigating. Rotation or cover cropping, not leaving soil fallow. There's definitely water issues, as Geoff mentioned before me, associated with watering cover crops. But there's also evidence, of course, that keeping live plant roots encourages soil aggregate formation and potentially increases slow cycling soil organic matter. Now, ones that I think have a little bit, that have less evidence are potentially comparing irrigation types and frequency, potentially maybe adding the same amount of water, but not as frequently. And this would give microbes less access to that organic matter. So water is required for organic matter to dissolve and then enter a microbial cell. So if there's not water always available, then at least to the microbes maybe near the surface, then you might be able to preserve a lot of that organic matter. And then finally, I think where there's a lot of interesting research and development, and I know there's people in this webinar now that represent the industry, are these bio-based fertilizers that add microbes or probiotics basically to soil that could potentially, if we increase the right types of microorganisms, could increase the residues, which could increase long-lasting soil organic matter. So these are just some examples of how we can use our new understanding of organic matter dynamics in arid systems to maybe increase organic matter over time. So in summary, soil organic matter contributes to many soil health functions, especially in desert soils. And this may be a way to simplify soil health assessment. So 2 follow-ups there. So why do I say especially in desert soils? Well, if you just look at water holding capacity alone, if we can increase our water holding capacity, which is our biggest limiting resources a lot of times, then soil health might matter more in deserts than it does in other places. In terms of simplifying soil health assessment, there's more and more lists coming out of soil health assessment frameworks, and they all seem to be getting longer and longer. There's more and more things that need to be measured, which can cost more than $10,000 per sample. So we need ways of simplifying soil organic matter assessment. And because soil organic matter connects to so many soil health functions, it might be a great candidate. Another point I tried to hit home is that both soil organic matter concentration and the composition influence soil health. And finally, desert soil health should be assessed and enhanced differently than in wetter climates. Thank you very much for your time.